She was a poor girl, surviving on small wages and quiet sacrifices. But when she offered an unexpected act of kindness to a stranger, she never imagined she was touching the life of a billionaire and that the man she helped could change everything she had ever known about love, power, and fate. Who was he really? Why had he let her pay for his coffee? And what would he do next that would turn her world upside down? Clara Bennett wiped a droplet of sweat from her brow, even though the air conditioning hummed insistently over the cafe. Her apron was slightly damp from rushing to keep up with the lunch crowd. At 24, she had learned to move through life quietly, like a shadow, paying attention to everyone except herself. She juggled double shifts, sent half her meager paycheck to her widowed mother, and had abandoned her architecture scholarship when her father's sudden stroke had drained every last savings. Dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford, and pride was a burden she had long abandoned. The cafe was bustling that afternoon, filled with executives and consultants from a nearby corporate summit. Their laughter and confident chatter collided with the clatter of cups and trays. Clara moved gracefully between tables, memorizing orders, avoiding eye contact, making herself small. That was when he walked in. He wasn't grand or ostentatious. His suit was well cut but slightly rumpled, a soft gray that didn't demand attention. His tie was crooked. His hair had the faint trace of a restless morning. Clara noticed immediately how he stood, quiet, slightly tense. As though expecting judgment, he approached the counter, and as he handed over a sleek black card for his coffee, the machine beeped sharply, declined. A hush spread across the room. The manager's voice tightened. "Sir, if you don't have another form of payment," phone subtly raised. Whispers circulated. "Guess he's not who he looks like." He didn't protest. He didn't reach for his wallet. He simply stared at the counter, eyes calm but measured, hands steady. Clara felt something stir inside her, the quiet human humiliation that only the truly empathetic could recognize. She could see the pride in him, the restraint, the shame that refused to voice itself. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "I'll cover it." Her card slid into the machine, the balance tight, the gesture a personal sacrifice. The transaction approved. The cafe seemed to exhale collectively. The man's gaze fell on her. For a moment, there was no awe, no curiosity, only recognition, fleeting and sharp, like a line traced through memory. "It's just coffee," Clara said softly, aware that her pulse had spiked. "Thank you," he replied, voice calm, deliberate, layered with something she couldn't place. As he left, Clara returned to wiping tables, feeling as invisible as she had before. But across the street, inside a sleek black car parked in the shade, a phone screen lit up. A card had been frozen manually, and a man, Daniel Hale, though no one here knew the name, had just confirmed what he had been searching for. Kindness existed, uncalculated and pure. Flashback, years earlier. Daniel's own father had taught him that wealth could not buy integrity, a lesson learned too late. Betrayed by a business partner and forced to build an empire from scratch, he had long ago stopped trusting people's gestures of goodwill. Yet now, watching Clara act without hesitation, without calculation, something inside him stirred, the dormant hope he had buried beneath boardrooms and stock tickers. He watched her disappear into the crowd, her small frame carrying quiet dignity, and wondered, not for the first time, if this girl, this stranger, could change more than a single moment in his day. Clara had barely returned to the rhythm of the cafe when the bell above the door jingled again, that sharp note slicing through the din like a question mark. She looked up, expecting another executive in a hurry, another client too busy to notice the girl behind the counter. But it was him. He walked in deliberately, almost casually, though his presence shifted the air around her. Even in the low hum of conversation, she felt it, a gravitational pull towards someone she didn't know, someone whose life existed on a plane she could barely imagine. His suit was now slightly more relaxed, sleeves rolled, but his shoes were polished to a reflective gleam, catching the sunlight that streamed through the front windows. There was still something off, though, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a wariness in his eyes that suggested he wasn't just a man who walked in to see if he acute s. Clara tried to ignore it. She was busy wiping a table when he approached, leaning slightly, as though carrying a weight she could not see. "I hope I'm not disturbing anything," he said, voice soft, measured, yet oddly familiar. "You're not," Clara replied, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, heart thudding against a cage of nerves she didn't understand. He paused, scanning the room before his gaze settled on her. "I noticed how you helped me the other day," he said, just above a whisper. There was no judgment, no pride, just observation. Most people wouldn't have. He trailed off. Clara felt a flicker of shame and something else, a cautious curiosity. I didn't think much of it, she said, setting a cup down. It's just coffee. A faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His stare carried depth, like he was reading her not for superficial amusement, but to understand a rhythm she had learned to hide. She glanced at him, noticing little details, a rare wristwatch that spoke of wealth she could never fathom, fingers calloused from decisions that were not her own, and a posture honed to command rooms without ever needing to raise a voice. There was power there, subtle, dangerous. But he moved as if it meant nothing, like a man who had long ago mastered it and now sought something else entirely. Flashback. Clara's own history whispered through her mind. She remembered the nights she counted coins to cover the electricity bill, the afternoons she paused to watch children sketching on torn notebooks, wishing she had the chance to go back to her architecture drawings. Her father's voice, thin and strained, would sometimes cut through her memories. One day, you'll do something that matters, Clara. That had been before the stroke, before bills turned into mountains, before survival became the canvas of her life. He hesitated, voice low, almost hesitant. I wanted to see if kindness still existed. In the world, in people. Clara blinked, startled. Kindness? Yes. He leaned back slightly, hands resting loosely on the counter, a gesture that was casual but deliberate. Because everyone around me, they see only what I have, not who I am. She hesitated, searching his eyes, glimpsing a vulnerability beneath the control. A glimpse of the boy who once dreamed, the man who had built walls around himself taller than skyscrapers. The gap between their worlds felt impossible, but there was something magnetic, undeniable, in the honesty that floated between them. He left a tip, generous, far beyond what she could ever have imagined. But it wasn't meant for her ego. It was acknowledgement, a quiet recognition that she had seen him in a way no one else had. As he disappeared into the street again, Clara wondered, who was he really? Why had he allowed her to help him, to step into a role she didn't understand yet? And what would come next? Would she ever truly see the man behind the billionaire, or was this fleeting moment just a whisper in the chaos of her life? Across the city, in his office overlooking the river, Adrian Hale, though she had no idea of the name yet, watched from a darkened window. He studied her, not for attraction, not for curiosity, but because in her, he had glimpsed something rare, something that hadn't been bought, bargained, or manipulated. A light. And for the first time in years, he wasn't calculating. He was learning. The next morning, Clara awoke to the hum of the city that never seemed to pause, the sunlight cutting across her small apartment in jagged lines. She rubbed her eyes and noticed the envelope resting on the counter. The cafe had slipped it under her door before she left last night. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful, deliberate. Inside, a simple note. Your kindness did not go unnoticed. A friend. She laughed softly, shaking her head. A friend. Who would call her a friend for helping a stranger with coffee? Her thoughts wandered, tracing back to the man in the cafe. Something about him lingered, not just the humility he wore like armor, but the way his eyes had caught hers. Recognition. That fleeting pause. It was unlike anything she had seen before. Flashback. Clara remembered her father teaching her to notice people, to read the spaces between words and gestures. The world will rush past you if you don't look closer, he had said, just before the stroke stole his words into silence. She had learned to watch quietly, to survive, to understand. And now, that lesson echoed as she thought about the man whose identity she didn't know but whose presence seemed too heavy to ignore. Meanwhile, Adrian Hale navigated the morning chaos of his city office, though he wasn't working. He had left instructions for his assistant to pause all calls and meetings, telling no one why. His mind kept circling back to the girl, her small, decisive act of generosity that hadn't even needed recognition. Most people would have glanced at him, measuring his wealth, his influence, his subtle vulnerabilities. She had not. She had simply acted. And that had unsettled him more than any boardroom betrayal ever could. He picked up a silver-framed photograph on his desk, a relic from the days before the empire, before the betrayals that had hardened him into unyielding resolve. It was him at 20, standing in a dilapidated office that smelled of fresh paint and ambition. The man in that photo had trusted people too easily, had loved too openly, and had paid dearly. But seeing Clara reminded him that the world might still contain someone untainted by calculation. At the cafe that afternoon, Clara moved with her usual quiet efficiency, refilling tables and noting orders, but her mind kept returning to the envelope. She had folded it, set it aside, yet every glance at it brought a flutter of curiosity and unease. A friend, or something more. Her co-worker, Lami, noticed the distraction. "You okay?" Lami asked, her tone light, teasing. Clara forced a smile. "Yeah. Just thinking about someone, I guess." Lami raised an eyebrow. "Someone you helped?" She froze, then shook her head. "Not really. I don't even know their name." The afternoon passed in a blur of movement and orders. Until he returned, again dressed down, sleeves rolled, the faintest crease in his forehead suggesting deliberate carelessness. He approached her table, where she was wiping down a corner near the window. "Hello," he said, eyes steady, almost piercing. "Hi," Clara replied, heart pounding. She fought to keep her tone neutral, though every instinct screamed caution. He glanced at the envelope on the counter. "I hope it didn't cause any trouble," he said softly. Clara's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said, a subtle smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Just consider it a small acknowledgement for what you did." She studied him, sensing layers beneath the surface. "Why do you care so much if it was just coffee?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes softened, catching hers with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, charged. "Because," he finally said, voice quiet, "the world notices when someone acts without expectation. And that is rare." A shiver ran down Clara's spine. Something about the tone was familiar, almost confessional. For a brief moment, she felt like she had stepped into someone's private world, a world she wasn't meant to enter, yet couldn't turn away from. As he left, she noticed the same measured gait, the slight hesitation before the door closed. It was as if he wanted her to follow, but not command her attention. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered, why does this man, whom she knows so little about, feel so vast, so untouchable, and yet strangely close? Across the city, Adrian watched from a distance, leaning against a lamppost near the cafe. His eyes followed her back inside, noting how she moved, how she cared, how she survived. And he realized something dangerous. Her presence had begun to unsettle him. Not his business, not his empire, but him. Evening fell across the city, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, and Clara found herself walking home along narrow streets she knew like the back of her hand. The envelope in her bag felt heavier than it should have, as if the words inside carried unseen weight. Her mind replayed the moments at the cafe, the quiet acknowledgement, the way he had looked at her without expectation, and that faint, deliberate hesitation that made her feel simultaneously noticed and invisible. Her thoughts drifted to her father again. She remembered him, hunched over the kitchen table, counting bills with trembling fingers, whispering apologies he didn't need to give. "One day, someone will see you, Clara. Not the you the world measures, but the you no one else can," he had said. That memory made her chest ache. Survival had been her training. Kindness had been optional. And yet, this stranger had changed the rules in one brief encounter. A flashback cut sharply through her memory. The hospital corridor where she had watched her father fall asleep for the last time, hand clutching hers. She had been 15, and she had promised him silently that she would carry his dreams, even if the world demanded she bend. Architecture had once been her escape, the sketches of hospitals and bridges sprawling across her notebooks, full of hope before reality had pulled her into work at the cafe. Meanwhile, Adrian moved through the city like a ghost, though nothing about him was ethereal. He was deliberate, calculating, yet something had shifted. Watching Clara over the past few days had introduced a variable he hadn't accounted for. Unfiltered human reaction. Not strategic, not transactional, genuine. It unsettled him more than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He ducked into a narrow alleyway to avoid the usual corporate entourage, to breathe in the sounds of the city in its raw state. The honking, the laughter, the clatter of small shops closing for the night. All of it was familiar, yet now colored by anticipation. He knew he had to see her again, not to manipulate, not to impress, but to understand. At the cafe the following afternoon, Clara noticed him even before he entered. The subtle shift of air, the faint scent of his cologne, the deliberate way he scanned the room. He had an almost invisible presence, yet he drew attention simply by existing. He approached her with that same careful gait, hands in pockets. Expression unreadable but intense. "Evening," he said, voice quiet but deliberate. "Evening," she replied, trying to keep her composure, though her pulse betrayed her. "Back for coffee." He tilted his head slightly. "Not for coffee. For conversation." Clara blinked. Conversation? He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. Yes, I wanted to hear about your designs. The sketches you mentioned. Her heart skipped. How could he know? A faint panic crept in, but she masked it. I didn't show them to anyone. I noticed, he said softly, almost reverently, scanning her expression, gauging truth from hesitation. You create not for attention, but for people. A shiver of recognition passed through her. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't praise. It was understanding, the kind her father had spoken of. That rare acknowledgement of seeing beyond the surface. As she spoke about her discarded dream, her voice softened, spilling the memories she usually kept locked away. Her father's encouragement. The endless nights balancing work and care. The resignation to a life smaller than the one she had imagined. He listened without interruption, without judgment, and for the first time, Clara felt the strange, dangerous pull of being truly seen. Outside, the streetlights flickered, casting long shadows. Adrian lingered, watching not just her, but the space she occupied in the world. And in that quiet, charged moment, he realized a truth he hadn't dared acknowledge. The man behind the billionaire mask had begun to feel something far beyond curiosity or respect. Something fragile, something perilous. And Clara, unaware of the empire looming silently behind him, wondered again, who is this man? Why does his presence unsettle me so? And why do I feel, even for a moment, that my life will never be the same? The city had cooled into a quiet evening, neon signs flickering in rhythm with distant traffic. Clara sat alone at her tiny apartment window, sketchbook open but untouched, her mind replaying the cafe encounter. Every detail, from the tilt of his head to the way he noticed her sketches, lingered like an uninvited thought she couldn't shake. She traced the lines of a half-finished hospital wing, her pencil hovering over the paper as if the act of drawing could summon clarity. Flashback, she remembered her father's hands, thick with calluses from years of manual work, guiding hers over a protractor. Design, Clara, he had whispered, eyes bright despite the pallor of illness, for people who can't fight for themselves. Buildings should hold them, not just walls and ceilings. Those words had become her mantra, though life had forced her into smaller battles, away from blueprints and into the relentless grind of waiting tables and calculating pennies. A knock at the door startled her, and she froze. It was late. Who could it be? Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. The door opened slightly, and there he stood, Adrian Hale again. But tonight, there was a weight in his posture, a gravity that demanded attention, not as a billionaire, but as a man holding something unspoken. You shouldn't be here, she said, trying to mask both alarm and the pulse quickening in her chest. He smiled faintly, almost ruefully. Neither should I. Clara noticed the faint smudge on his cuff, the subtle wear of shoes that, by all rights, should have gleamed. He looked deliberate, human, and yet impossibly composed. I need to talk, he said, voice low. About what happened? What happened? She asked, though she already knew. His presence alone stirred the same questions she had struggled to suppress. You helped me without knowing who I was, he said. His eyes were steady, almost confessional. No one else did. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't care. And I needed to understand something. Clara's brow furrowed. Understand what? He hesitated. The pause charged. If kindness still existed in the world. If someone could act without thinking of gain or advantage. Her mind flickered to the countless faces she had met, patrons who sneered, colleagues who ignored her, strangers who judged. Only he had observed, noticed, lingered. The irony was sharp, a man with the world at his fingertips searching for what she had given freely without question. As he spoke, Adrian's thoughts drifted to his own past. He remembered building the empire from nothing after betrayal and loss, watching people move around him like chess pieces. Trust had been a liability. Love had been a weapon. And yet, in Clara, he saw the first spark of the human connection he had lost long ago. A dangerous spark, one he couldn't ignore. Clara finally spoke, her voice quiet, tinged with both defiance and curiosity. Why me? Why not anyone else? He leaned back slightly, searching her expression, as if calculating a truth beyond words. Because you didn't see me as a man who could give or take. You saw me as someone who needed help. And that changes everything. The room fell silent. Outside, the city hummed with life indifferent to the intimate tension within. Clara felt exposed, not by confession, but by the simple act of being observed and acknowledged. Something inside her shifted. The tiny, controlled life she had constructed felt suddenly porous, fragile against the gravity of his presence. Adrian, too, felt the shift. Not the shift of power or status, he had that in abundance, but the shift of something unpredictable, vulnerability. The kind that came once, maybe twice, in a lifetime. You don't owe me anything, he added, almost as an afterthought. And yet, his gaze lingered, searching hers, measuring. I wonder if you know the impact you've had on me. Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of her table. She wanted to ask, what does that mean? Who are you really? But she didn't. Instead, she only wondered deeply, dangerously, how a single act of kindness could ripple into a life so much larger than her own. The city was quiet that night, the neon lights reflecting on wet asphalt from a sudden, brief drizzle. Clara barely noticed the rain. She was seated on a bench near the small park she often passed on her way home, her mind replaying the cafe moments and the late-night visit. She tugged the thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to shield her from the chill or the stirring unease in her chest. Flashback, she remembered her mother, frail but fierce, urging her to persevere even when every day felt like a negotiation with survival. Kindness is rare, Clara, but when it comes, it can change everything if you let it. Those words had felt abstract, almost naive, until tonight. Until him. Adrian had been sitting in a nearby shadowed corner, watching her from a distance. He hadn't followed her, not exactly. He moved deliberately, ensuring he remained unseen yet close enough to absorb her reactions. He had spent weeks, days, hours observing not her for fascination, not her for conquest, but her humanity. It was reckless for someone like him, but the truth was that after decades of power, of people reacting to wealth and influence, he didn't know how else to measure it. He stepped closer, finally revealing himself, and Clara flinched slightly. I didn't mean to startle you, he said softly, the edge of fatigue in his voice betraying a sleepless night. Clara hesitated, unsure what to say. Her voice caught. You. Why are you here again? He sat beside her on the bench, leaving a respectful distance. Because I need to see something, he said, gaze steady on her face. And because after everything, I still don't know if I believe it exists anywhere else. Clara frowned. Believe what? Kindness. The kind that doesn't ask for return, that doesn't weigh intentions against benefit, he said, a faint smile breaking through his seriousness. The kind you gave me. Her mind raced. She wanted to argue, to deny that one small act could matter in a world that demanded so much. But the way he looked at her, the vulnerability behind the calculated mask, shook her. It reminded her of her father. The way he had looked at her when she was small, proud yet sorrowful, as if he carried the weight of every impossibility on his shoulders. Flashback. Her 7th birthday, her father's last. He had taken her to the park, handed her a simple necklace, the kind children treasure, and smiled. No matter what happens, Clara, you are seen. You are loved. He had gone to buy ice cream, and in the brief seconds of absence, a memory etched itself painfully. Someone had tried to steal her from the world. That fear, that fragility, still lingered beneath her every cautious step. Adrian watched her, noting the way her eyes darted to her fingers, tracing patterns as if finding solace in motion. You carry a lot, he said gently, and yet, somehow, you still notice the small truths that others overlook. Clara's lips parted, but words failed her. She wanted to ask who he really was, why he lingered outside the boundaries of her ordinary life. But the questions tangled with the sudden rush of emotion she didn't know how to name. He leaned slightly closer. You think because the world has been unkind, your small acts mean nothing. You are wrong. You've shifted something in me, a dangerous, irreversible something. Her heart thumped. Dangerous. Irreversible. The words carried a weight she wasn't ready for, yet couldn't ignore. Why me? She finally whispered. Why now? He glanced at her, a shadow of regret crossing his face. Because I've spent too long seeing people for what they can give me, and tonight, I saw someone for what they are. The wind shifted, leaves rustled. Somewhere, a car honked in the distance, and yet in that fragile, suspended moment, Clara realized that this encounter was no longer about a cafe, or coffee, or simple acts of courtesy. It was about uncharted territory, two people, cautiously drawn together, bound by something invisible yet undeniable, teetering on the edge of transformation. Suspended moment. Clara realized that this encounter was no longer about a cafe, or coffee, or simple acts of courtesy. It was about uncharted territory, two people, cautiously drawn together, bound by something invisible yet undeniable, teetering on the edge of transformation. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Clara's small apartment, cutting through the thin curtains and lighting her cluttered desk. She hadn't slept much, thoughts of Adrian lingering like a shadow she couldn't shake. She traced the outlines of the sketches she had abandoned the night before, her fingers trembling slightly. Each line felt heavier, as if infused with the weight of choices not yet made, of truths not yet revealed. Flashback. She remembered the first time she had truly felt powerless. Her father, once a man of quiet strength, had collapsed under the weight of a stroke. She had been only 19, balancing school, work, and the care of a home that seemed to shrink around her responsibilities. Money vanished like smoke, and with it, the security she had taken for granted. Yet, through it all, her father's voice lingered. Strength isn't the absence of hardship, Clara, but the courage to rise despite it. Her mother, soft-spoken but unyielding, had taken her hand. You've always been kind, even when the world was cruel. Don't lose that. Clara had nodded, swallowing the ache of fatigue and disappointment. She had become invisible, moving through life quietly, unnoticed, yet always observing, always noticing small acts of honesty and integrity. The knock on the door startled her. Her heart leapt as she opened it to see Adrian standing there, coat damp from the morning drizzle, hair slightly tousled as if he had walked a long way just to reach her. "Good morning," he said, voice low but calm. "May I come in?" Clara hesitated, then stepped aside. "Why are you here again?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. He entered slowly, eyes scanning the modest room with curiosity rather than judgment. "I wanted to see you," he said simply, "and perhaps, to make a small amends." She raised an eyebrow. "Amends? I think I underestimated how significant your kindness was," he said, "and I've realized that you shouldn't carry this world alone." Clara felt a swell of both gratitude and suspicion. "You're a billionaire," she said softly. "You have entire teams to fix problems. Why this personal attention?" Adrian paused, studying her. "Because I needed to see how someone handles life without expectation, to understand what real courage looks like. And in the process," he hesitated, "I've learned that some people cannot be measured by money or influence." Her mind flashed to moments of her life where small acts of attention had been ignored or dismissed. The colleague who took credit for her work, the landlord who haggled over rent, the patrons who sneered at her tiredness. And yet, here was someone who noticed. Truly noticed. Clara stepped closer, curiosity mingling with the cautious edge she always wore. "Then what are you saying?" He smiled faintly, a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. "I'm saying that us meeting like this, it changes the rules. You've reminded me that there's more to life than empire and profit. And I think, maybe, there's more to you than you've allowed yourself to see." Her pulse quickened. Questions swirled. Who is he really behind the polished exterior? Can she trust the sincerity she feels in these moments? And most dangerously of all, could she allow herself to feel the stirrings of something she had long denied love? The room seemed smaller, charged with tension and unspoken possibilities. Adrian stepped back slightly, giving her space, but the gravity in his gaze pulled her inward, toward a place she had kept carefully guarded. "Clara," he said, voice softening, "you see me when no one else does. And I want to see more of you, if you'll let me." Her chest tightened, caught between fear and desire. The world outside was indifferent, unforgiving, and relentless, but here, in this quiet room, she felt the fragile beginnings of something dangerous, something irreversible. Clara's days became a blur of sketches and late-night work, her hands stained with pencil marks and paint. Yet her mind never strayed far from Adrian. Even in the hum of the cafe, the chatter of customers, and the clinking of cups, she found herself scanning faces, wondering if any of them carried the same weight he did or the same quiet honesty. Flashback. She remembered the night she stayed late cleaning tables. The lingering scent of espresso and vanilla, the hum of fluorescent lights above. She had thought of her father, of how he would have chuckled at her stubbornness and persistence, how he would have reminded her, kindness doesn't seek reward, Clara, but it often finds it in the most unexpected places. Adrian's presence had altered something in her, though she refused to admit it fully. It wasn't merely attraction, it was the magnetic pull of someone who saw her without expectation, who valued her essence over circumstance. And yet, the questions gnawed at her. Was he truly what he seemed, or was there a layer of deception she had yet to uncover? That evening, as she stepped out into the cool air, she noticed him waiting across the street, his posture relaxed but deliberate. The city lights glinted off his watch, subtle but unmistakably rare. He didn't wave or call out. He simply watched, patient, as if waiting for permission to cross into her life again. Clara approached cautiously. "You're persistent," she said, half a question, half a statement. I could say the same about you, Adrian replied, a soft smile touching his lips. But perhaps persistence is only meaningful when it's shared. They walked together, unhurried, the city bustling around them like an oblivious audience. She noted the way he moved, calm, controlled, yet aware of every detail, every passerby, every fleeting expression. He was observant, always, and that made her both uneasy and intrigued. You always watch so closely, she said, breaking the silence. Does it ever become tiring? It does, he admitted, especially when the world only reflects what it wants to see. I've learned to look for what it often ignores. People like you. Moments like this, her chest tightened, and for a moment, she imagined her father beside her, smiling quietly, proud. The weight of her own struggles, the long hours, the unpaid bills, the sacrifices felt lighter somehow. She realized she had been seeking recognition all her life, not knowing it would come from someone like Adrian. Flashback, the first cafe encounter played in her mind. The subtle shift in his eyes, the fleeting recognition of her gesture. She hadn't known then that he had orchestrated the moment, that her kindness had pierced the armor of a man used to being measured by wealth and influence. You make it sound like I saved you, she said, trying to keep her voice even, but failing. You did, he said simply. But more importantly, you reminded me that there's more to life than what we accumulate, that there's truth in generosity and courage in simplicity. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain yet to fall, and Clara felt herself pulled into the gravity of his words. He wasn't just a billionaire, she realized. He was a man who had been broken, rebuilt, and now sought authenticity in a world that often demanded masks. Her heart thudded with a mixture of hope and fear. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to step into the unknown, into the possibility of a life changed entirely by someone she barely knew yet felt she had always known? Adrian's gaze softened. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I only want you to see what I see. That your kindness matters. That you matter. Clara swallowed hard, her voice catching. And if I fall, then you fall with your eyes open, he said, earnest. And I'll be there, if you want me to. For a moment, silence enveloped them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. In that pause, the weight of choices, the pull of destiny, and the delicate threads of trust intertwined. And Clara knew, deep down, that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The weeks that followed felt suspended between reality and something more fragile, more dangerous. Clara moved through her days with the familiar rhythm of work and school, yet her thoughts kept circling Adrian, each memory like a spark threatening to ignite a fire she wasn't sure she could control. She found herself replaying every word, every glance, every quiet moment that had shifted the trajectory of her heart. Flashback. She remembered the first night she had left the cafe alone, the rain beginning to fall in soft sheets. She had glanced back and caught a glimpse of Adrian standing under a flickering streetlight, coat-soaked, watching her without moving. Something unspoken had passed between them, a recognition that went beyond chance encounters. At 19, she had been taught to be wary, to measure kindness and sincerity with caution. Yet, in that moment, every lesson dissolved into something unnameable. That evening, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Meet me at the Riverside Park. I have something to show you. Her stomach tightened. Adrian never sent cryptic messages, never asked her to meet him in private places. Hesitation warred with curiosity. She knew better, yet she felt compelled. When she arrived, the park was almost deserted, the golden hour light bleeding across the water, making the ripples shimmer like molten gold. There, seated on a worn bench, Adrian waited, his posture relaxed but eyes alert, scanning every corner, as if expecting someone or something to emerge. Why here? She asked, masking her nerves with a wry smile. Because some things are clearer away from the crowd, he said, voice low. Away from expectations, titles, and noise. I wanted you to see me, not the man everyone assumes I am. Her gaze drifted across the park, the memories of her own childhood flickering unbidden. She remembered afternoons spent with her father in similar parks, him lifting her onto swings, his laughter booming above the city hum, his love unconditional until it was snatched away by illness. She felt the ache of absence alongside the stirrings of trust. You've been different, she said carefully. I mean, I feel like I barely know you, but also like I've known you forever. And that scares me. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You saw me in a moment I never intended to be seen, he said. I was humiliated. I was alone. And you, without knowing anything about me, chose kindness. Not for reward, not for recognition. You chose Emmy. Her chest tightened. But you tested me. You orchestrated that entire thing, didn't you? I did, he admitted without flinching. Not to manipulate. Not to control. I needed to see if authenticity still existed. And I've realized. Kindness like yours is rare, fragile, and worth protecting. Her hands trembled slightly as she crossed her arms. Protecting me, or yourself. He met her gaze with intensity that sent shivers down her spine. Both, perhaps. But mostly, you. I can't explain why, but something in your honesty, your courage, has made me want to change. Flashback layered into the moment. Adrian remembered boardrooms where people smiled but schemed, fiancés who plotted mergers in whispers, betrayals that left him hollow. None of that mattered here. Clara's simplicity, her integrity, was a mirror to a part of himself he had long buried. The park fell silent except for the water lapping at the shore. Clara felt the pull between fear and trust, between reason and desire. She knew stepping closer could mean surrendering her carefully constructed defenses, yet every fiber of her being leaned toward him. I don't know if I can trust this. She whispered, the words barely carrying over the soft evening wind. You don't have to, Adrian replied softly. Not yet, but I hope you will, because what comes next will change everything, whether you trust me or not. Her heart stuttered. Questions surged. What exactly will he do? Is this about him or me? How far does his sincerity go? The air was thick with anticipation, with possibilities hanging like stars about to fall. And Clara realized that her life, her very future, was poised on a knife edge, balanced between fear, hope, and the mysterious gravity of a billionaire who had already changed her world with one simple act of kindness. Clara stood at the threshold of the office building, heart hammering, mind spinning. The letter had been simple. Come, I have something to show you. She didn't know what to expect. Relief, anger, revelation, but instinct told her that nothing would ever be ordinary again. Inside, the sleek lobby was empty except for Adrian. He wasn't dressed in the tailored suit that screamed billionaire dominance. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, as if ready to be human rather than untouchable. He looked at her with an intensity that made her forget the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the small victories no one noticed. I didn't ask you to come, he said, voice low, controlled, yet tender. I only wanted you to see. She crossed the room slowly, the polished floors reflecting her apprehension. See what? He gestured toward a glass case, inside which lay documents, plans, and images. Her eyes scanned them, confusion giving way to disbelief. The scholarship reinstated in her name, fully funded. A foundation established in her father's memory. Medical programs for stroke victims. Her architectural designs ready to be realized in public hospitals. Every step she had dreamed of taking alone, suddenly paved, supported, and amplified by him. You did all this without telling me, she whispered, voice trembling with anger and awe. I did, he replied. Because loving you doesn't mean controlling you. It means removing obstacles so you can grow without compromise. Flashback. Clara remembered the first cafe encounter, the quiet bravery of stepping forward. The simplicity of her gesture that had pierced his world of cynicism. All those moments led here, the silent acknowledgement of worth, not for performance or flattery, but for humanity. Her chest tightened. But why? Why care so much? He took a step closer, eyes never leaving hers. Because you reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. That the greatest wealth is in people. That kindness can change lives. And that someone like you, unseen by the world, deserves to be seen fully. Tears pricked at her eyes. Not for the money, not for the foundation, but for the truth, the honesty in his words, the rare vulnerability of a man accustomed to masks. You could have anyone, she said softly, but you chose to care about me. I didn't choose you for love at first sight, he admitted. I chose to trust you, because you saw me without the weight of my empire pressing down. That's rarer than any fortune I've built. The room fell silent, the air heavy with unspoken possibilities. Clara realized that this was not a declaration of possession, but of faith in her abilities, her choices, and the woman she had become. I don't know what to say, she breathed. Then don't say anything, he whispered, stepping back. Just know this, whatever happens next, your path is yours. I will be here not as a billionaire trying to buy your affection, but as someone who believes in you completely. Flashback layered subtly. Adrian remembered boardrooms filled with false smiles. Mergers disguised as love, betrayals that had hollowed him. Clara's simple act of kindness had pierced decades of cynicism. Her trust, her courage, had been the catalyst that changed him more than she could ever know. Clara exhaled, the weight of doubt and fear lifting, replaced by a fragile hope. The scholarship, the foundation, the acknowledgement of her worth, all tangible manifestations of someone seeing her truly. And as she looked at Adrian, she realized that the love she felt was not born from wealth or grandeur, but from recognition, respect, and the humanity he had shown her. Outside the window, the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the city. In that moment, Clara understood. One act of kindness had set in motion a chain that changed everything, not because of money, not because of power, but because of hearts willing to see and nurture what was often overlooked. Adrian extended his hand. Will you walk forward with me? Clara looked at him, the city sprawling beneath them, her own life poised to expand beyond imagination. She nodded, a tentative smile breaking across her face. Yes, with my eyes open. And in that space, between trust and vulnerability, wealth and kindness, the girl who had fallen for a billionaire discovered something infinitely more precious: the truth that love, courage, and humanity could reshape a world that often overlooked both.